morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the webinar today, which is titled Calming the Storm, Mindfulness and TBI. My name is Chad Thompson. I am the Brain Health Network Training Coordinator here with the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. Today's webinar is being presented by Dr. Jill Brooks and her son Jared Hammond. We're very lucky to have both of them today. Dr. Brooks integrates mindfulness, yoga, and cognitive behavioral strategies in her clinical practice. Dr. Brooks' private practice focuses on evaluation and treatment of neurological issues such as ADHD, learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, concussion and epilepsy. Mindfulness and yoga techniques along with cognitive behavioral strategies serve to balance anxiety and depression. Dr. Brooks is also certified in chair yoga, Reiki level 1, and with ashrams for autism level 1. Dr. Brooks is also in the process of completing her certification in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, through the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Amherst Medical School. Jared Hammond is the senior physical psychochemist at Head to Head Consultants in Gladstone, New Jersey. He's currently a doctoral student in the clinical and school psychology program at Kane University with an emphasis on mindfulness. Jared is trained in heart rate variability and coherence management. He's a certified yoga teacher, YT 300, and teaches yoga to individuals at Head to Head Consultants. He's also certified in LV chair yoga, Reiki level 1, and ashrams for autism level. He is the head fencing coach at Bernards High School and utilizes yoga and mindfulness with his student athletes. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Brooks and Jared Hammond.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Chad, and to the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. We are very excited to speak with you today about mindfulness and mindful movement, and let's take it away. So at first, we're going to provide definitions and give you an overview of the talk. We will, along with definitions, provide some information about the use of an application of mindfulness in traumatic brain injury, provide you with some information based on current research that is available, and hopefully have time for an experiential component as well.
So mindfulness has been defined in a lot of various manners. John Kabat-Zinn, who is on the forefront of mindfulness and also is the designer and developer of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, often refers to mindfulness as the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So really being aware of things as they arise, as they're occurring, without the judgments that we often make with our mind. It's also been described as the willingness and capacity to be equally near all events and experiences with kindness, curiosity, discernment, compassion, and really these are definitions highlighting the fact that mindfulness is based in participation. There are a lot of other facets of mindfulness. It could be a state, a trait, or a practice, being active or open to the present moment, living in the present moment, full awareness of internal versus external experiences. Also, it could be a state of being or a mental state achieved through meditation. Basically, mindfulness is a lot of different things and not just one thing. ACT, which is acceptance and committance therapy, a type of therapy very similar to MBSR training, often looks at 5 facets of mindfulness. The first one being non-reactivity to the inner experience. So whatever the inner experience is, it is a true and valid feeling. Being able to observe those internal events. then acting with awareness. So being mindful of these events as we make our decisions, being able to put these internal events and experiences into words, and then the non-judgment of those experiences.
So what we're talking about here is present moment awareness. And something important to consider is this moment that we are experiencing right now, we will never have again. So if we find ourselves thinking out into the future or reminiscing about the past as opposed to staying in the present moment, that moment will pass and we will never have that moment again.
So some misconceptions about mindfulness are very variable. Some people may think that mindfulness means doing nothing or just sitting still, a way to get high without drugs, shutting off your thoughts or running away from the thoughts, a quick fix, relaxation or entering a trance state, being self-absorbed or self-indulgent, or somehow that mindfulness makes us passive or weak. The truth is that mindfulness is a very active practice, noticing the brain and the mind as we drift and wander naturally, and without the judgment, being able to become aware of that drift and bring ourselves back to the present moment. In truth, the Buddha did not invent mindfulness because no one can invent a state of mind.
And that's why mindfulness is not necessarily something that is spiritual or religious. So what we're talking about when we mention something about intention is the idea of setting an aim or a goal, and that the purpose, and setting a purpose, that one means to carry out whatever you're going to be doing next. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn is he was a student at MIT when he first started exploring this idea of mindfulness or meditation. And he has his PhD in a science field related to biology. And so his goal has always been to match or blend the mind-body connection and also blend mindfulness with science. So he first introduced mindfulness-based stress reduction to the American public in the 1990s with an emphasis on consulting your inner geography or the guiding light that is within all of us, rather than searching for answers outside of self. He had a very active meditation and yoga practice, and so he wanted to try and utilize this and blend this together so that this could be utilized across various different environments. He set up the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in the early 2000s, and with the goal of utilizing MBSR to reduce stress, promote well-being, and making psychological functioning more adaptive, with the idea of working with individuals that were referred within the medical school for various types of difficulties, including pain management, immune suppression, depression, and anxiety. MBSR is one of the most widely researched types of mindfulness meditation. And the interventions have been shown to enhance how we regulate our behavior and our emotions, which certainly is something that can be extremely helpful in the area of traumatic brain injury, and also promote resilience. It can enhance awareness of our body sensations and improve emotional regulation, and improve our mood, our empathy, and strengthen the immune system. So there has been much more and more research in the areas of looking at mindfulness within traumatic brain injury populations. And as early as 2013, at the JFK Center for Brain Injuries, there was work done looking at the use of MBSR in group experiences. I know that the Kessler Center is doing some mindfulness research currently. I know that JFK is no longer running regular MBSR groups, but they are working with individuals utilizing mindfulness on more of an individual level. So we're looking at mindfulness as one of the tools in the toolbox for individuals with traumatic brain injury. Much of the work that we do at Head-to-Head Consultants is with individuals who present with concussion, because primarily we are seeing mild traumatic brain injury here in the office. So practicing awareness helps us with developing some of the skills that are critical for both teaching and learning. And when we practice awareness in this way, it really serves to strengthen the connections we have between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. And as a result, there is better control, and we're better able to utilize our executive skills to override any of our emotional reactivity.
So there are many benefits of mindfulness. We've highlighted just a few here. Really, the truth is that mindfulness is a practice that can help unite the breath and the body. And the nice thing about practicing mindfulness is there's no special equipment needed or no special postures to learn. It can be practiced at a seated position, while walking, laying down, while eating. There are various ways to practice mindfulness. We can choose to direct the attention to the sensations in our body as they are occurring and really experience all the things rather than trying to block out any particular experience, whether it be viewed as positive or negative. And that goes into the interruption of this painful thinking emotional cycle, whereas some types of therapies, when you have these painful thoughts arise, they may tell you to stop what you're doing or to eliminate that thought. A lot of mindfulness-based trainings like MBSR and ACT will ask you to really experience that and really be present for that part of the cycle. And the great thing about mindfulness is that it translates very well into our daily lives. It can be incorporated very easily. Mindfulness results in changes in the white matter connectivity, so parts of the brain responsible for cognition. We notice that through neuroimaging. And this includes areas involving self-control, mood, our response to stress, our immunoresponses to disease. We also, other than just seeing changes in white matter, we also see changes in gray matter, and that's not just from mindfulness, that's also from meditation practices. We also see growth in the temporoparietal junction and the hippocampus. So overall, what we're seeing through a lot of the literature is that with a practice of mindfulness, there are clear changes in the brain.
Yes, and interestingly enough, within the past several years, we've seen very interesting results coming out of John Letty's lab in looking at the stress response and this idea that following concussion, we are starting to see that there is an uptick or a hyperreactivity in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what regulates fight, flight, or freeze. So if we're able to utilize this as a tool for trying to help with regulating and exerting self-control over the parasympathetic nervous system, then certainly we can have some sort of change in the amount of hyperreactivity as it relates to anxiety, depression, and behavioral discontrol.
Mindfulness also helps reduce a couple things. Most notably, we wanted to point out about stress response, depression, emotional reactivity, and rumination. And it's especially good for rumination. ACT therapy talks about the difference between self as context and the self as content. Really, basically, we're talking about spinning of stories, which in ACT is referred to as self as content. I'm a bad person. Why did I do those things? And really spinning that story and entering that vortex of the storm, or even worrying about things that may happen in the future, which creates anxiety, or worrying about things that happened in the past, which leads to depression. And comparing the past to present, which really takes us out of this present moment. Mindfulness practices help reduce all of these ruminatory responses to help us stay present and stay grounded.
So oftentimes we'll see with anxiety, people will be out of the present moment and saying things like, what if, what if, what if? What if this happens and what if that happens? Realizing that 99% of what people are what-ifing about will probably never happen. However, it can also lead to more of a catastrophic response, which serves to escalate the anxiety and get someone to a place of a point of panic or paralysis.
Mindfulness also improves cognitive flexibility, our ability to focus or attend to detail, processing speed, especially with complex information, working memory, which was formerly known as short-term memory, and also helps improve our immune response functioning. All of these things occur with TBI, especially with executive skills. And our ability to have emotional self-control as well as behavioral self-control is largely improved through mindfulness-based practices.
So when we look at life stressors, there are really some important things to realize that we have, no matter where we live or who we are, we have this universality of the human condition. It's really not personal. Every one of us has life challenges and stress, which can be interpreted as some sort of suffering. Ultimately, we all have something. And we want things to be different. We want things to oftentimes be different than the way they are. And stress occurs when we want to cling to something that we used to have. Also, if we wish that something pleasant could stay the same, oftentimes that relates to craving, whether that is a relationship or a situation before an accident or before a catastrophic event in our lives, or even the idea of craving certain foods. We just want things to stay the same because that's quite comfortable. So part of this is also realizing that we really need to accept that life isn't always the way that we want it to be. And the fact is that can make life very challenging and create an ongoing sense of dissatisfaction. And so with stress, it exists in our life whether we want it or not. There is often a cause to stress and also an end. And, you know, part of what happens with stress, there really are two parts to stress. One is stress that is created with the actual event, but also our reaction to what has occurred. And how we relate to it is totally up to us. There is this need for resiliency and our ability to have the capacity to overcome challenges of all kinds, whether it's related to trauma or tragedy, personal crises, or the stresses of everyday life. Resiliency is really our ability to bounce back and be stronger and wiser and be more personally powerful. So mindfulness, we feel, is a tool that can really help us with that. So What we're talking about is this idea of the importance of being able to pause and stay in the moment. So Viktor Frankl is often quoted for this quote, but there is some indication that perhaps the quote is not readily attributed to him. But it's this idea that what we're trying to do by staying in the moment is have this space between what is the stimulus and the response to be able to have an opportunity to have control and choose our response.
So there are 4 pillars for mindfulness in terms of creating our foundation. And that has to do with understanding the emotions as well as the emotional patterns so that we may better manage and find some sort of control. There's also our ability to apply this mindful awareness to those situations that may trigger or launch our emotional response, especially strong emotions. Our ability to provide more response options and more space, as we were just highlighting before, between the actual experience and our reaction to that experience. And then finally, we want to allow for a conscious response, not just an unconscious emotional reaction or a quick gut reaction to the experience. We really want to create this connection between the body, the mind, and feeling.
And so that's also where we're essentially trying to reduce impulsive responding, which is that knee-jerk response that offers very little space between the stimulus and the response. So one way to look at this is that we are trying to seek, or oftentimes people are trying to seek a refuge from stress, and sometimes we do that in healthy ways, and sometimes we as human beings do it in unhealthy ways, whether it's related to distracting ourselves with technology or with alcohol or food or other things. So we're really trying to push this idea of a healthy refuge where we start to trust our own ability to hold our difficulties courageously and be able to let them be.
We all have strategies to find that refuge. Some are more productive than others, and while some of them may be staying in the present moment, filled with compassion, others are more trying to avoid and move away from that. The truth is, at the end of the day, we want to include compassion, and not just a generalized compassion, but a compassion for the self. Dr. Jack Kornfield, who also studies a lot of mindfulness and has a lot of great research coming out of his lab, is what's called a Buddhist psychologist, really takes the practice of psychology and incorporates mindfulness principles largely derived from Buddhism, and really feel that this is a nice way of holding compassion for the self.
The thought being also that once we have established some compassion for self, we can also extend that outside of self. And what I wanted to highlight for you is that Sharon Salzberg, who is another individual who has been doing a lot of work in the area of mindfulness since the 1970s. She has been teaching mindfulness, and she also connects compassion and happiness. And currently, right now, starting yesterday, she has a free daily mindfulness challenge. It's called the Real Happiness Meditation Challenge. It's a free challenge that you can sign up for online at Sharon Salzberg, SALZBERG.com, where she provides you with free daily meditations that are usually 5 to 10 minutes, along with some sort of elaboration and information. And we have signed up for it, and the registration is extended through February 3rd of 2018. And so I would really encourage you. It's a really great way to get your feet wet in the area of meditation practice. And again, it's free, and it's just trying to put out mindful meditation out into the world.
Meditation and compassion are really going hand in hand. We think often about some of the Eastern languages, and especially in a lot of these languages, the word for mind and heart are the same thing. And that really highlights this idea of the connection between the mind, the body, and the spirit. Kindness and compassion towards the self is, truthfully, it's intrinsically woven together. It's hard to parse it out. And Jon Kabat-Zinn, again, MBSR designer and developer, really came out to say that to think of mindfulness as wise and affectionate attention, and attention towards the self filled with compassion and kindness. When we cultivate mindfulness, we really want to be able to find a way to get in touch with those experiences of kindness and openness, which is not always readily available, especially if we're talking about TBI. Our ability to focus on being aware of the breath naturally is one of those things that's easier said and done, as we'll go into in some of the later slides. The truth is that things change. And staying present and paying attention on purpose long enough to see that things change, including that things feel constant like pain, is important to moving through life. Learning to live peacefully with a challenge is something that's very difficult. Oftentimes, as we were highlighting before, we might turn to less productive strategies like alcohol or other measures that are designed to remove our experience or to avoid the situation, rather than being present and realizing that the moment is just that. It's a moment, and eventually it will pass and change.
So, getting started in mindfulness. Some of the nuts and bolts are to make the time. And when you think about it, if you start out with just focusing on the breath for minutes, we all have a few minutes, excuse me, that we can select during the day to try and section off for ourselves. It's a good idea to select a location that is quiet and private, whether it is in the morning in a room where people will not be coming in and out of, or perhaps at some point during the day when you get to work or when you are coming home at the end of a long day. It's best to try and pick a time that might be consistent for you. The nice thing about doing this in the morning is that it can inform the rest of your day, and you can spend time during the day to perhaps taking some moments where you check in with the breath. As we said, just about any position that's comfortable for you, but one that dignifies your inner self is most important. There is an astronaut pose where you can lie with your back on the ground and put your feet up on a chair, like the astronauts being launched into space, or sitting up or standing or lying down. It's often good to set an intention, and what I mean by that is, what do you really want to get out of this moment? Do you want to be less reactive? Do you want to feel happier? Do you want to feel more connected with yourself, have better sleep? Try to think about that before you get started and begin gradually. That's why it's nice to just start with a couple of minutes and then extend. And this whole idea of heart-mind connection is so important because you want to do this with kindness to yourself. So, a really great place to start is by focusing in on the breath. And we think about how many times we are breathing in and out every day. I would ask you, how many breaths are you consciously aware of during the day? How much do we really pay attention to our breath? You know, the idea of meditating, and mindfulness is a meditation, is to shift out of autopilot and to really start to concentrate or focus. And a great way to stay in the present moment is to focus on the in and out of our breath, to try and make that connection between our mind and our body in the present moment.
When it comes to practicing mindfulness, we want to bring our full attention to whatever we're doing in the moment. As we highlighted before, it could be simply walking and noticing how the heel hits the ground and the shift of the weight from the heel to the ball of the foot. When it comes to perhaps cooking, setting our mise en place or really getting everything organized and noticing perhaps the color of our ingredients. When it comes perhaps to even doing something simple like washing dishes. What direction are we scrubbing these dishes? Do we notice the temperature of the water, the weight of the plates in our hands? And that really just highlights this idea is that whatever we're doing, we are being fully present and attending to that action rather than running down the list of to-dos that we have or have not accomplished either this day or the next day, being grounded in that moment. Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a spiritual leader, really said that there can be an easier place to start than just seated meditation, which are, again, just being fully present in whatever action we decide to do.
And it may even be being fully present in a conversation with someone we are friends with or someone we love or care about or someone that we're working with, is to focus our attention on the interaction in the moment instead of spinning or getting distracted by what we're going to be doing later on in the day. Walking meditation is something that Jared just alluded to, and it's oftentimes considered a transitional practice because it's really more like daily life than just sitting and meditating. And it's this idea of feeling the sensation of our feet and our legs in walking and slowing down the pace of our walking and focusing on our breath, our in and out of our breath, not changing the breath in any way, but just breathing in and out and feeling the sensation in our feet while we're walking or moving. I wouldn't suggest this now in freezing weather unless you do this indoors, but there's something to be said about not having shoes and socks on and really connecting with the earth with our feet, and maybe feeling that on your floor or your carpet. The interesting thing is when we are meditating is that when the mind wanders, which it always will, that's what our minds do. We just bring it back to the act of walking itself.
So as we were highlighting before, there are a couple different ways to begin your meditation or your mindfulness practice. In yoga, easy pose is the place to start. It's a comfortable seat with our sits bones, the bones in the butt, grounded against the earth, finding a long spine while bracing our core. And really that comes back to this idea of sitting tall in a dignified, proud position, especially for our inner self, relaxing the shoulders as we elongate the neck. Hands could be on the knees or comfortably in the lap. Traditionally in the yoga philosophy, palms up is for energizing and palms down is for being grounded. But this is not the only way to do our meditation or mindfulness practice. It can be done laying down with the legs outstretched. It could be done with, as we highlighted before, that astronaut pose, laying down with the legs on the chair. You could also do this sitting in your chair, whether you're at home or the office, because the truth is any chair anywhere is a great place for us to begin our mindfulness practice.
So the mind wanders. It just does. Think of how many times we are trying to focus on something and suddenly start thinking about our grocery list or what we're going to be doing later. You know, the idea about mindfulness is if you get distracted, which we all do, we just notice it. We don't want to spin any stories about it. We don't want to analyze it. We just want to notice that it's there. And in trying to do this, you might just want to even briefly say to yourself gently, oh, my mind has wandered off, and then come back. Be curious about it, almost like in a childlike way where children have curiosity about new things. And be curious about where your mind has wandered off to, and then come back. For me, when my mind is wandering, what I like to do is I like to bring my attention back to the next breath, but when I notice that I am wandering, I smile, because it's a way to keep me from not judging myself and saying, oh, you wandered again. Come back here. How could that be? Come on, get focused. I mean, we say a lot of things to ourselves that are just not kind, supportive, and gentle. And so for me, if I can just smile, it's a way of exerting kindness towards self.
When we're talking about mindfulness, we're really not looking to remove any one thought in particular. Really, it just is highlighting the importance of being fully present and experiencing everything that comes into that present moment. A lot of times in some of the mindfulness practices that are associated with yoga, teachers might instruct you to imagine that you're on a river and that each thought gets placed on a leaf. And then you watch and observe that leaf move down the river. It highlights this idea that we're not getting rid of anything. We observe those thoughts, we observe those feelings, we allow them to pass into the mind, and then we allow it to pass out, neither sitting on one thought too long or forcing any thought out. Things come and go on their own.
And also another wonderful meditation exercise is cloud watching. And so I frequently will move outside of the office with people that I'm working with, and hopefully, and I will do this on a day where there are clouds in the sky, but it's the idea of looking at the clouds and realizing that clouds, just like our thoughts and our feelings, will pass, and they are not permanent. And oftentimes when we are in a difficult or stressful situation and we are having some suffering, we feel like this will never end. And so by practicing these skill sets, then oftentimes we will get better and better at this. And oftentimes we hear people say, I'm not good at this. I'm going to stop this right away. I tried meditating. Just not working. Well, that's why we call it a meditation practice or a yoga practice, because practicing it makes it come more easily and makes it feel more comfortable for us. So I often like to think about arriving meditations. When we get somewhere and we come into a situation, because oftentimes our body physically gets someplace before our mind has fully arrived. We're starting to notice in the literature and also in big business that many companies are using arrival meditations before they start their office meetings. It's the idea of just taking a moment to give ourselves a chance to catch up and integrate our mind and body. It allows us to come into the present moment, and we can either do this with our eyes closed or open, and just paying attention to the shapes, the colors, the sounds, any smells that are in the room, and doing so again non-judgmentally with the curiosity of a child. And after we switch from the visual, we can go to the hearing and what we hear, and then also what we're feeling or experiencing. I like the idea of a mindful moment, and so I know that when I first get to work, I close my door, I close my eyes, I focus on the breath, and I do the same thing in between working with individuals that come into the office. I always want to be able to give myself the opportunity to be present. And sometimes what I need to do is just clear out what has just occurred, get myself back in the present moment so that I can try and pay attention fully to the next person that I am going to be with in the office.
So what we'd like to do is we'd like to take a moment to invite you to do a mindfulness practice with us. This is from the Real Happiness Meditation Challenge from Sharon Salzberg. Again, her website is sharonsalzberg.com, S-A-L-Z-B-E-R-G. It's a free practice. This was from the first day of the training, so we invite you to participate. To begin with, you can sit comfortably and relax. You don't have to feel self-conscious as though you are about to do something special or weird. Just be at ease. It helps if your back can be straight without being strained or overarched. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel comfortable. And notice where the feeling of the breath is most predominant, at the nostrils, at the chest, or at the abdomen. Rest your attention lightly in just that area. See if you can feel just one breath from the beginning, through the middle, to the end. If you are with a breath at the nostrils, it may be tingling, vibration, warmth, coolness. If you are at the abdomen, it may be movement, pressure, stressing, release. You don't have to name these sensations, but feel them. It's just one breath. If images or sounds, emotions, or sensations should arise, but they're not strong enough to actually take you away from the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You don't have to follow after them. You don't have to attack them. You're breathing. It's just one breath. It's like seeing a friend in a crowd. You don't have to shove everyone else aside or make them go away. There's the breath. There's the breath. If something arises, sensations, emotions, thoughts, whatever it may be, that's strong enough to take your attention away from the feeling of the breath, or if you fall asleep, if you get lost in some incredible fantasy, see if you can let go and begin again. Bring your attention back to the breath. If you have to let go and begin again thousands of times, it's fine. That's the practice. It's just one breath. You may notice the rhythm of your breathing changing in the course of this meditation session. You can just allow it to be however it is. And if you see your attention jumping to the past, jumping to the future, judgment, speculation, that's all right. Our practice is to gently let go and simply return. You can shepherd your attention back to the feeling of the breath. Remember that in letting go of distraction, The important word is gentle. We can gently let go. We can forgive ourselves for having wandered. And with great kindness to ourselves, we can begin again. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Sometimes we feel energized and exhilarated after this kind of practice. Sometimes calm and rested. And sometimes too rested, as though we were waking up from a nap, a little groggy. All of that is normal. See if you can bring an awareness of your breath several times throughout your day. So I thank you for accepting the invitation to that mindfulness practice. There are a lot of different applications of mindfulness to others. There's the interpersonal relationships, as we were highlighting before. When you're in conversation with someone, do you notice yourself nodding your head or eager to speak before the other person has finished speaking and truly being present to what they have to say? Through our development of our mindfulness practice, we can listen with full attention for others and really find a way to find that centered awareness of the emotions, not just for ourselves, but the way that we interact with others, and understanding those emotions and how it affects our behaviors, our openness, our willingness, our acceptance and receptivity to other people's thoughts and feelings, understanding that everyone is a little bit different and everyone has something valuable to say. Finding an ability of self-regulation, whether that be through low emotional or behavioral activity, or that automaticity or impulsivity in our reactions. Really being present and aware of these things helps with that regulation. And most importantly, as we highlighted before, that compassion, not just for ourselves, but also for other individuals. Through mindfulness, we really find an alignment of the mind, body, and spirit. And with that alignment, we find things seem to flow a little bit more easily for us.
So yoga is considered one of the mindful movements, just like walking meditation is a mindful movement.
Yoga itself, as a word, means union. And what are we uniting? We're uniting our breath with that movement or the experience of these movements. It is one of several techniques for integrating this mind-body connection. And it is a meditative practice for discovering perception and cognition. And the great thing about yoga is that it's a practice for anybody, anytime, anywhere. Yoga, through its movement, is a rhythm, a melody, a harmony, a spirit, a spiritual practice. It really highlights all the things that are important to life. There's a lot of scientific support for yoga now that we have the ability to look at it through neuroimaging techniques. We see that people who practice yoga are demonstrably larger brain volume. We see it through the mental map, the somatosensory cortex is a little bit increased. We also see the superior parietal cortex, which is largely responsible for attention, larger in people who practice yoga, as well as some other things like the visual cortex, responsible for sight in the back of the brain, the hippocampus in the center of the brain, responsible for memory and stress relief, as well as the posterior cingulate cortex and the precuneus, which is responsible for our sense of self or our self-concept. In summary, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, it is an active practice. It's not just something that's very passive or we allow it to happen. It is something that can be practiced anytime, anywhere, and one that we benefit from by practicing daily. Just like any muscle group, The more we practice, the stronger it gets. And the more that we engage in mindfulness practices, whether it be through movement or through being present in the moment of our daily tasks, we find that our ability to stay present and stay grounded through the storm increases.
So certainly this is sort of a quick overview of mindfulness meditation and mindful movement. And the idea of being able to show people what is important and involving both ourselves and others just to really ground this practice into our lives. I wanted to end with a poem, and I'd encourage you or invite you to close your eyes, sit comfortably, to listen to this poem, which is actually one of my favorite poems, and I think is truly inspiring. It's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture still. Treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whomever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Now, the beauty of this poem is that it was written by Rumi, who lived from 1207 to 1273, and it's translated by Coleman Barks. So lots have changed since the 1200s, but in many ways, many things have not.
So in addition to the other resources that we've highlighted throughout this talk, we'd like to bring to your attention a couple apps that you can download onto your cellular device or perhaps to a tablet to help encourage mindfulness practices throughout your day. Calm or calm.com, depending on which platform you are using, is a great way to do your mindfulness or meditation practices. You can set specific timers as short as 1 or 2 minutes to do your meditation. Headspace is a wonderful app developed by a British man who really uses a lot of great down-to-earth mechanisms for explaining what's going on in the body or the brain as you're meditating. And there are a lot of great rewards and a lot of great talks. 10% Happier is a talk and also a book, but also an app that allows us to really find mindfulness practice, especially if you're still a little skeptical about mindfulness. 10% Happier may be the one for you. The Chakra Chime, as well as Insight Timer, are great applications that really connect you to not just mindfulness or meditation practices, but ones that are going on throughout the world.
And the nice thing about Chakra Chime is it helps you get grounded by starting the practice or teaching someone how to focus on the breath by using a chime or the sound of a singing bowl. And you can switch the tone of the chime based on what resonates with you or your client or that sort of thing. I really love that. A lot of the individuals we work with love utilizing and playing around with some of these apps. 10% Happy was developed by Dan Harris, who is a reporter for ABC News, and he began meditating after he reported he had a panic attack in front of 10 million people on national TV. So he was very much the skeptic, as Jared mentioned, and so hence the name of his app. All of these are free apps, just so that you know.
If you're interested where we got a lot of the information for this talk, here are a list of references: Center of Mindfulness at UMass, Mindfulness Meditation Summit, Omega, Kripalu, Yoga Alliance. These are also not just references, but great resources if you are interested in learning more about mindfulness meditation or perhaps some trainings within the field.
The nice thing about Sounds True and New Harbinger publications is they actually have meditations that you can download. And so often nowadays, any of the authors with New Harbinger or Sounds True, even though they may have actual books available, you can go to the website to download the meditations that are discussed in the book. Sounds True is a wonderful resource for mind-body connections, and actually there was a beautiful 10-day mindfulness summit that is just concluding that has 4 speakers each day that presented on mindfulness over the past 10 days. It ended several days ago. And I think for a nominal fee, you can own the series as well. And certainly, Jared and I have no proprietary interest in anything that we've discussed. Everything that we have provided you with offers free resources, and so that is something to remember. This happens to be one of both of our favorite quotes, and it's the idea of remembering that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift, and that is why it is called the present. So we thank you for joining us. This is your basic overview of mindfulness and being able to utilize this practice for concentration, for emotional and behavioral control with individuals with traumatic brain injury, but also to be able to use with loving kindness for ourselves, because as care providers, any of us that are care providers, it's important that we utilize self-compassion, because then we can extend that compassion to others. So we thank you for your interest. I know that it is 1 o'clock and many of you have to sign off. Please feel free to reach out to us at Head Tech Consultants if you have any additional concerns or questions. We will make ourselves available. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Dr. Brooks and Jared. That was a really great webinar with a lot of really useful and practical information. We do have a minute or two for some questions. If anyone has any, please type them in now. And as Dr. Brooks mentioned, if something comes to mind after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to them. You can also reach out to us here at the Alliance, and we would also make sure any questions or thoughts or anything information you're looking for would be forwarded to Dr. Brooks. You could email me at cthompson, that's C like Chad, and my last name is Thompson, so cthompson, THOMPSON, at BIANJ.org. And within the next week, the webinar will be put up on our website, and so you'll be able to view it at any time. And we appreciate you attending. If anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead. If not, we're good to go. But Dr. Brooks and Jared, thank you again so much.
You're welcome. And maybe before you reintegrate back into your day, take a mindful moment.
We have one question coming in here from Anna Marquez. See what she has here.
I'm sorry, we can't see the question.
Yeah,
He's typing.
Anna Marquez asks, are there any books about TBI and mindfulness that you would suggest, or a website?
There are no websites. Basically, what we have done is literature search to try and garner much of the research that is out there and available. Nobody has written a book as of yet. You know, we're bringing this to you. This is quite new in utilizing mindfulness meditation with individuals with traumatic brain injury. So yes, it would be wonderful if there was a book, but there is not at this point. Okay. One thing that I wanted to share is that Jared and I are doing a training with a group called Love Your Brain. And they, as Leslie Johnson mentioned, have a great website. They focus on working with individuals with traumatic brain injury. Jared and I are doing their training in Philadelphia in March. And actually, we submitted an abstract to the meeting for the Brain Injury Alliance meeting here in New Jersey for May. Unfortunately, we may not be able to do that, so we are considering trying to do an additional webinar with Jared and myself and the people with Love Your Brain at a later date, if you all would find that interesting or helpful. Thank you for mentioning that, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, because as Dr. Brooks knows, we've also had a chance to get to know the folks at Love Your Brain, and they really are a great resource. So I encourage anyone to check out their website. And one last question, Dr. Brooks and Jared. Elizabeth had asked, do you think that mindfulness is detaching or disengaging from the presence right now?
You know, that's a great question, Elizabeth. I think that the idea that mindfulness is detaching or disengaging from the present moment is a misconception of mindfulness. There is a concept of what's called diffusion, which is removing ourselves from the story that we often spin or that tends to swirl with that rumination. Mindfulness is a way to sort of hit pause or slow down the frames so that we are still in the moment and we are still experiencing everything that's occurring in that moment. However, we're not closing ourselves off or necessarily detaching from those experiences. I would say that mindfulness practices highlight concepts of non-judgment and non-attachment, but I also would highlight the fact that it's a misconception of closing ourselves off. We still want to experience everything that's occurring, whether it be a joy or a depression. We want to experience all of it.
And it's this idea that we are not attaching to the emotion, because attaching to the emotion and not wanting it to change is what really creates the stress and the suffering. So to be able to recognize that and to stay with it in the moment, but create that space for being able to have a mindful response as opposed to going straight to an emotional response is a goal of mindfulness.
Great. Once again, Dr. Brooks and Jared, thank you so much for volunteering your time today. We greatly appreciated it, and this is a wonderful topic and a great presentation. And so we thank everybody for your time, and please stay tuned for the PowerPoint up in about a week.
Thank you so much for being present for this. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.